You're 30,000 feet above the Baltic Sea. Your F-35 is running silent, radar in passive mode, everything by the book. Then your threat receiver lights up. Something has just painted you with a fire control radar. Not a ground-based missile system. Not a legacy fighter. Something airborne. Something you weren't supposed to be able to see coming. That scenario isn't fiction. It's the nightmare that keeps U.S. Air Force planners awake, because the aircraft that could make it real already exists. It's called the Sukhoi 57. And for years, American officials have publicly dismissed it as underfunded, underproduced, and strategically irrelevant. Here's what they don't say in public. There's a moment from 2018 that almost no one in Western media covered properly. 2 Su-57s landed quietly at Khmeimim Air Base in Syria. No official announcement. No explanation. The Pentagon said almost nothing. We'll come back to that moment, because what those two aircraft were actually doing there changes everything about how you should think about this jet. But first, let's be clear about what this video is not. This is not a spec sheet comparison between Russian and American jets. This is not Russian propaganda dressed up as analysis. This is not a story about defense budgets or procurement politics. This is a story about a fundamental question, whether the United States Air Force is being honest with the public, and with itself, about a threat it has every reason to take seriously. To understand why the Su-57 matters, you need to go back to March 1999. NATO is bombing Serbia. The F-117 Nighthawk, America's original stealth aircraft, the jet that made the world believe radar-invisible flight was a permanent American advantage, is flying a routine strike mission over Belgrade. And then it disappears from the sky. A Serbian air defense unit using a Soviet-era S-125 Neva missile system, technology from the 1960s, had shot it down. The pilot ejected. The wreckage landed in a field. And with it, a myth shattered. Stealth is not invisibility. It is a reduction in radar cross-section. And if your enemy knows the frequency you've optimized against, knows your flight path from a spy or a leaked schedule, and uses long-wavelength radar that stealth coatings handle poorly, you are not invisible. You are just harder to see. Harder is not impossible. Russia absorbed that lesson immediately. Hold that thought. Fast forward to today. The Su-57 carries a weapon called the R-37M, NATO designation, AA-13 Axe-Head. It is the longest-range air-to-air missile currently operational anywhere on Earth. Range of over 300 kilometers. Speed of Mach 6. That means an Su-57 pilot doesn't need to get close to you. He doesn't need to outturn you or outclimb you. He fires from a distance your own missiles cannot reach, and then he turns around. Your best counter, the AIM-120D, reaches out to roughly 180 kilometers. You do the math. And then there's the radar. The N036 Byelka is an active electronically scanned array, an AESA system, that Russia claims can detect low observable targets at 400 kilometers. Independent analysts debate that number. But even at half that range, it represents a serious problem for any aircraft that relies on not being seen first. Here's what most analysts miss. The Su-57 doesn't need to be as stealthy as an F-35 to be dangerous. It needs to be stealthy enough, combined with a sensor and missile package that lets it kill before the engagement becomes a close-range dogfight. That is a fundamentally different design philosophy. And it might be the smarter one. Before we get to what Russia was actually doing in Syria, and why the Air Force response to it quietly changed their procurement priorities, if you find this kind of analysis useful, hit subscribe. No fluff. No filler. Just the questions the briefing rooms are actually asking. Now. Syria. 2018. 2 Su-57s arrive at Khmeimim. They fly approximately 2 combat sorties. Then they leave. Russian state media runs a brief story. Western outlets mostly ignore it or frame it as a publicity stunt, Russia showing off a jet that barely existed in production numbers. That framing was almost certainly wrong. According to analysis published by War on the Rocks and picked up by several defense research groups, the Su-57 Syrian deployment was most likely an intelligence collection mission. Those aircraft were probing. They were flying near zones where American electronic warfare systems, Patriot batteries, and AWACS surveillance aircraft were operating. They were listening. Mapping frequencies. Testing reaction times. Building a picture of exactly how American air defense systems behave in a real operational environment. Think about what that means. Russia sent its most advanced aircraft not to fight, but to learn. To understand the electromagnetic signature of every American system in that theater. And when those jets returned to Russia, everything they collected went directly into future tactics, future jamming systems, future missile targeting algorithms. A RAND Corporation assessment from 2023 concluded that the gap between U.S. and near-peer adversary air combat capabilities has narrowed significantly over the past 15 years. Not closed, but narrowed. And the report specifically flagged beyond visual range engagement as the domain where that narrowing is most acute. Meanwhile, the U.S. Air Force's answer to the Su-57, the next-generation air dominance program, the planned successor to the F-35, faced significant budget pressure and restructuring in 2024, according to the Congressional Budget Office. The program that was supposed to guarantee American air superiority through the 2050s is now delayed, redesigned, and uncertain. This is where it gets serious. The United States currently operates more than 450 F-35s across all service branches. Russia has approximately 22 Su-57s in service. On paper, that's not a threat. In reality, you don't need numerical parity to change the calculus of a conflict. You need enough of the right aircraft, in the right place, with the right weapons, to make an adversary hesitate. And hesitation, in a modern air campaign, can be decisive. Here's what the Pentagon won't say publicly. The Su-57's value is not measured in how many exist today. It is measured in what it teaches Russia about fighting the United States Air Force, and in how that knowledge gets transferred to every other system in Russia's arsenal. The AESA radar technology tested on the Su-57 feeds into ground-based systems. The electronic warfare data collected in Syria informs missile guidance. The beyond visual range doctrine developed around the R-37M reshapes how Russian pilots train against American tactics. Now bring this to the question that actually matters in 2025 and beyond. If conflict were to escalate over NATO's eastern flank, or, further out, over the Taiwan Strait, where American air assets would be operating at the outer edge of their range against Chinese systems that studied every lesson Russia learned, the Su-57's legacy isn't about the jet itself. It's about what that program taught an adversary about finding, fixing, and killing American aircraft before the pilot even knows the engagement has begun. That is not a budget story. That is not a technology story. That is a strategic warning that has been hiding in plain sight for 6 years, since 2 unmarked Russian jets landed quietly in the Syrian desert and started listening. So here's where we land. The Su-57 is not going to replace the F-35 as the world's dominant fighter. Russia does not have the industrial capacity to build it in numbers that would challenge American air power directly. That part of the official narrative is true. But the Su-57 gave Russia something more valuable than a large fleet. It gave them a testbed, a flying laboratory for tactics, sensors, and weapons that directly target American vulnerabilities. The R-37M alone has forced a rethink of how U.S. pilots approach beyond visual range combat. And the largest strategic implication is this. The age of unchallenged American air superiority, the era that began over Baghdad in 1991 and defined every conflict since, is ending. Not because Russia built enough Su-57s. But because they built the right ones, flew them in the right places, and learned exactly what they needed to learn. Do you think the United States Air Force is doing enough to close the capability gap before the next major conflict? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. The sky that America owned for 30 years is getting crowded. And the jets filling it aren't asking permission.